So we'll call this meeting to order. Number 5 on the agenda, discussion of capital projects. We probably won't do much there. Dr. Sharp is going to be calling each one individually to share what that list is of that 60 million. So unless there's just something real pressing, we'll just be doing 1 through 4.
Is the list included in our packet? I guess it is.
No, they are finalizing phase 1 of it. The first phase of that 60 will be about 30 million of it.
Yeah, we're working with Justin and his team, and we're putting a list of what we're calling a phase 1 of that
Right.
60 million. And we'll bring that to you completed to the December meeting to request approval. And between now and then, we'll reach out to you and get your input on what we're looking at for each district individually. I've talked to a couple of you already.
You didn't talk to me about that gym we're gonna build up there at Dixon. I didn't get that phone call.
Not starting off like that.
This is not a good sign, Mr. Smith.
All right, and just a reminder, so there's no voting tonight. This is just discussion so that we can be ready to vote next week when we have our regular board meeting, and hopefully be able to get things going very soon after that. So, discussion of Clifton Hills, you have it in your packets here. We had 2 different options with 2 parts in each option. So, Ms. Black, it's your school. I'll turn it over to you and let you kind of take us through here for a minute.
Sure. I don't know if Dr. Sharp wants to kind of come through and tell us, or Justin wants to tell us the main, the high points of the different plans and what the choices are. Can you do that?
Yeah, so as we talked in our last meeting, I think the main challenge was, we had existing portables where the buildings wants to go and to stay out of that floodplain. So looking at probably a phase process where building on the front of the building and the rear of the building. And the 2 options there, I think one's a 12.5 to 1, and I think a 22.5. I think what we've have on the list is the 22.5. And the only difference is that back section there is a 1-story versus a 2-story.
Okay.
So really glad to see kind of what we envisioned that they would come back with. It's still, fairly difficult project with phasing and existing school and keeping the existing school in order and working around the portables.
Yeah. I think we spoke over the weekend about possibly calling a parent meeting for those at Clifton Hills to kind of gauge the temperature of what they would prefer. Because I know part of the option is, the option is taking some of the students, rezoning them for East Side and doing an expansion there, and then building a smaller renovation at Clifton Hills, or doing a big renovation and keeping everybody together, but it's going to be a rough year and a half and very cramped.
Exactly.
Okay. So I think I want to hear from the parents. I have an idea, just based on the parent meetings that we had last fall. I know that the community at Clifton Hills, the students are about 80 to 90% walkers. It's a walking community, and a lot of the people who live in that community don't have transportation. And that was the main concern that we addressed when we chose to do the Clifton Hills renovation instead of closing it, was taking those kids out of their community when their parents or caregivers don't have transportation to be able to participate in things at school or come get them if they're sick. It's further away on the other side of the interstate to take them to East Side. So that's my main I guess concern, what I'm considering, and I want to hear from the parents about, and I wanted, if we could get that. If we're going to be voting next week, do you think we can organize something at the beginning of the week next week?
Probably not.
Okay.
What if I'll put a pin in it for a second and point you to what we're proposing voting and just specifically look at Clifton Hills. So, as we discussed, you just went through those two options. We're putting it on there, right? And hopefully what we're showing is a high dollar amount. That 36 million that you see there is like the high dollar. Now, of course, all these prices are based on estimates of these architects, so we need to publicly say that they could change, right? But what the recommendation you're gonna hear from us at the end is not to wait, that we've got the funding to do all these projects. So what I would say is that if we have the will of the board to move forward, that then we spend some time planning. Even if we decide to go on Clifton Hills, I think it's prudent of us to make sure that that community understands that that 18 months during the building is going to be tight, and there's going to be some accommodations. And what I don't want to have is us say, let's move forward on the Clifton Hills site, and then people act like they didn't expect it to be a difficult process. So you're asking for my recommendation. What we're going to recommend later is that we can move forward with all of these simultaneously and spend time getting feedback from the Clifton Hills community about which option they want to do, and it can still be in budget either way.
So the voting would be yes or no to move forward now on Clifton Hills, and then we would decide between the two options that would roughly cost about the same.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I do know my counterpart on the county commission gave me a call last week, and he brought up some concerns that I also share. There's the way that it is built now. There's the overflow from cafeteria is the gym, and we're talking about expanding the capacity for this school. And I was hoping that we might be able to address maybe having an auxiliary building added to this, whichever option that we choose, to give them a new gym space so that we could, renovate and have an appropriate sized cafeteria and gym space for, there's going to be 800 kids at this school. They need a gym.
Yeah, so I spoke to Commissioner Graham as well, and he expressed that same interest. I don't think we're opposed to that. It's just getting an architect to figure out where that could happen, right?
Okay.
Obviously, that would change a little bit, that 36 million high mark.
Sure.
But again, to be clear, like these numbers are estimates, so they're going to change either way.
About how much would an auxiliary building cost? Guesstimate.
I think it depends. We've done,
Like something at Lookout Valley Elementary.
The last one we bid was about 1.7 million.
Okay. So when you're talking about having, 200 and something in the pot, 1.7 it's doable to find that money somewhere.
I think the main that Justin mentioned was, getting the architect on board, and then it's just a space constraint at the existing school. So, I think they looked at classroom space first.
Of course.
Make sure that you can have enough seats. But again, I think you do have some options here that we can dig into.
Okay. I don't want to get to the end of the project and us decide and move forward and do all of the things and say, oh, we'll do the auxiliary building later, and then they never get a gym. So I want to make sure that everything's in place and do it all at once. But those are my thoughts. That's the options that we have for Clifton Hills. I'm excited to have my community get a new school and renovated school, and getting our kids out of the portable buildings will make me a lot happier. Thanks.
And one of the things to consider, so the options, regardless, we've got to do one or the other with extra room for growth, just because that south side area is really starting to boom. So
It is, and what is a little bit different than what we're used to looking at when we look at growth. A lot of times we count rooftops, and this is not a community where you can do that. The school enrollment really shows us what the growth is in that community, because so many families live together in that community in Clifton Hills and East Lake, East Side. And so school enrollment is what tells us that the growth is happening, and that's the fastest growing area in Hamilton County right now. is East Lake and Clifton Hills and East Side on the south.
I'll put just add a point to this, and that Mr. Doherty asked for some of these numbers. We're starting to see a little bit of a plateau off right now, and you're actually seeing it at Howard as well, of where this huge increase, and it's starting to hopefully get to a point where that's kind of where we are. I think both options here, what is hopeful to me about potential growth is whatever we decide to do here, we do now know that East Side expansion there is a relatively easy, not easy in terms of money, but we know the property there.
It's a flat lot. It's there's space there. It's an easy build, not a whole lot of ground prep and stuff. Yeah. But yeah.
Other board members' questions? So I have one, looking at the two plans, going with the larger enrollment for Clifton Hills is also a little cheaper than going with the two builds, one at Clifton and one at East Side. But it will still carry the number that we need for any expansion.
Yeah, if we decided to go just on Clifton Hills site, what I would say is that what we now know is that if we saw unexpected growth, is that the East Side property is ripe for an addition there. And
Okay.
so if we get 6, 7, 10 years down the road and need more elementary space, we still have that East Side property that we could add on to.
All right.
So, Dr. Robertson, what is you and your team, what, I want to hear your recommendation.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Black on this, is that this is a difficult project, right? And what it's going to mean is that during the construction, if we decide to do it on Clifton Hills site, we know that we're gonna have to pull those students out of portables into that main building, which is going to be very tight during the construction. And what I wanna make sure that we are clear with that community is that if this is the way we're going, you can expect for 18 months that it's going to be tight. It's doable. I mean, we've already talked about from an instructional standpoint what that would look like, and we feel confident that we could do it. But there's a difference of us talking about it and having your kids for 18 months in tight quarters. And so I agree with Ms. Black that we need to set up a meeting there and have that conversation with them and make sure that they're on board with us. Or, you know, for some, it may be that they want an addition at East Side and to rezone, because it's about 70% walkers. We could contain that 70% at Clifton Hills and then rezone the rest to an East Side expansion. But I think what we've learned in the last 18 months on this project in particular is that the input from that community is extremely important.
So you really don't have a recommendation until you hear
That's right.
from what the parents.
But my recommendation is that we don't need to let this slow down everything else.
So what this would do then, we're saying to those folks, I think I'm understanding this, is that we're setting aside 36 million, it's yours.
Yes.
Clifton Hills community, it's yours. So now Clifton Hills community, you need to help us decide whether we want to do it this way or do it this way. And then that way we can move forward with Soddy Daisy, DuPont, Gateway, everything else. So that's what you're recommending.
Yes.
Okay. So when we gonna vote?
Hopefully Thursday.
Okay.
But then also, if they choose to go with the smaller build and keep it a little more community oriented, there's still the money
Yes.
left over to do the addition onto East Side.
Yes.
So they have a choice of two options still, really. All right, anybody else before we move on?
I just want to say that, I know that when I came onto the board, we've been talking about facilities, looking forward and looking back to what has happened in the past. I am in favor of the larger 2-story build, just because I don't want to get 6 or 7 years down the road and us plan to add on to East Side and it's still not enough, and still have that community and those schools be overcrowded. If we're gonna sink the money into it, I would like us to have room for growth, for sure.
All right. So we're going to move on to the Gateway project. If you look at the most current handout, it's the recommendation that we put 15 million toward the Gateway building to prepare it to become a third future-ready center for our county. And at this time, we'll ask Mr. Connor if you'd like to make some comments there.
Yes, and apologize for my tardiness. I had a little hostage exchange with the children and their mother, but we're all good now. So, talking about the Gateway building and talking about, thinking about my thoughts from before that are already in an open meeting, talk about kids that we can improve for the better. Based on that's at the bottom line. We're not just talking about projects to do projects. We're talking about projects to improve our school system for our children. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. Through conversations, I also think that we can't get to where we thought in January. I don't think we can get back to where that spot was. So if we're talking about moving forward and future ready centers, I've talked to Dr. Robertson about the situations that we're in and how necessary those are. I think that this is a bit of a tangent, but I'll go down it for just a quick second. I think that it's really important that these future ready centers allow the children to keep their identity at their home schools. I think that it's a really awesome situation where a child, like specifically a student at Red Bank High School, one of my schools, can be on the basketball team and be a part of his community and still have a chance to go up and learn a trade and come out with a certificate and a high school diploma and sense of ownership and pride in their community and in their school. I think that's a huge asset. I've talked often about how that was the way that it was at my wife's high school. She was in AP classes and the guy next to her was going across the street and building a house. And those houses are actually some of the best built on that street. So I think it's a really important thing that we're talking about. Things that we need to note with CCA staying at its current location, there are immediate needs that needed to happen because as was said on this board and this dais, that if the plan for that building would have been for the possibility of Norwell Park to go there, to move out of their ancient building into a moderately not ancient building, that it would have already needed a lot of work. It would have been a situation where I believe we had said it would be closed for at least 2 years to renovate completely. So we cannot just assume that them staying in their current situation is good for them, let alone best for them. So again, talking about outcomes for kids, we need to make sure that the second page, when we vote on it, has some solid dollar amounts. I think one of the ways that we get there, and I'm going to formally request this of administration, is that we get out some outside architects. Sorry, Justin. And get some shored up numbers, some real numbers about like we talk about how old Norwell Park is, but is it something that's salvageable? They've done amazing things in different places. I think immediately of the Haslam building that was Glocker on UT's campus. Looks the exact same way it looked when my dad met my mom standing out front of it, and I'm sure everybody on this dais is happy they met. And other buildings, I know that CSAS has just gone through the process of getting National Register of Historic Places. So we need to make sure that we go in and look at these buildings. Do we figure out that it's more like Clifton Hills and needs a complete redo? Or do we figure out that it's a little bit more like Saudy Daisy Middle, and this is something that we can really work with? So that was a lot of words to say, Dr. Robertson, how can we officially do that? We have 3 facilities, Norwell Park Upper, Norwell Park Lower, and CCA that need to be completely looked at. Top to bottom, what's structurally sound, what's best, and what is a potential for those? Where do we see that we can grow?
Sounds like we talked before, but we didn't, and you just threw me a softball. So I'll go back to the beginning of this whole document. This looks very different than what you guys saw a couple of weeks ago, and so I just want to walk through this to get to the answer that Mr. Connor's asking. And so, putting $15 million at Gateway to renovate it and the bottom floor into a future-ready center shows that we have the resources to do the rest of these projects, right? And so what the recommendation is that with this, what we approved next Thursday, is that we move forward with all these projects at the same time. Second thing that's at the bottom of this is the recommendation around working with the county commission to implement the option of the CMR process for some of these projects. Look at the note at the bottom, and I want to say it publicly so it's clear. These numbers, everybody's getting caught up on these numbers. These are the best estimates that we have from the architects that did these designs. That does not mean that Clifton Hills is going to be 36. It could be 28, or it could be 38, right? But these are good estimates of where we are.
Can I stop you there? You said best estimate, but you meant top estimate. Their
Yes, I'm
best
saying,
top estimate.
what people get caught up in the community is they see a number and they expect that exact amount to be spent. I'm trying to show at the high end that we can still do all of these projects, right? Moving forward at the same time, so that if we pause for a second at Clifton Hills to get community input, they know that they're still here, right? So if you flip over to the back, there's kind of a secondary recommendation, if you will, of kind of what we're recommending we do in the second phase. And I think this is to the question that Mr. Connor is asking. There's been a lot of media about these architects and how they got hired and why we did it. I think it was the right approach, 100%, and I'm recommending that we do it moving forward, right? And so we've listed 7 projects here that we think we are recommending as the next phase of considerations, whether that happens in 4 years, whether we've got enough money to do a couple of them in 2 years, right? But we recommend that we look deeper into each of these places. So for example, to Mr. Connor's point, Normal Park. We believe that that's a concern that needs to be addressed immediately, but we've not had a real assessment of those buildings. We had MGT come in that looked at suitability, that looked at how we're using it, looked at the systems, but not the structure. So what we're recommending is, as we move forward with these, is that we commit to hiring outside architects to investigate these projects to give us a good estimate on what those would cost. The next one I would point out is Signal Mountain. There is need for elementary space on Signal Mountain. We recommended in January that we do an addition at Thrasher. That might be the best approach, but it might not. We might need to build a brand new elementary up there. And so what we're recommending is going ahead and hiring an architect that can look at Thrasher, do a in-depth assessment of it, and tell us, is it the best use of our money to do an addition that would cover the, expanding enrollment there, or do we need to think about, building a brand new elementary school? What I think this sets the board up to is number one is we're getting better numbers early so that we can plan effectively. Orchard Knob's a good example here. We've got this deferred maintenance money that we're considering. Do we upgrade the HVAC that desperately needs to be done at Orchard Knob, but it's a $10 million project. So do we put $10 million into a building before we know it's salvageable for the next 30 years? And so we need to get an architect to come look at that building to tell us what we think about that building. So I think it instills more confidence in these projects so that you as a board know that we're not just shooting from the hip at these projects, and it sets us up for better long-term planning as we move down the road. So essentially, and we put a number down here that we would use, no more than 100,000, but even though if they're under budget of what we would need your approval, what we're saying is we're committing that if we go out and get an architect to look at Normal Park and it's going to cost us $18,000, even though you wouldn't necessarily have to approve that, we're going to bring it to you out of transparency to say we've hired XYZ architect to investigate Normal Park. Cliff's Notes version of what we're recommending you vote on next Thursday is that, you know, these projects on the front, the 5 projects we approve so that we can move forward immediately on these projects at the same time and not wait on Clifton Hills. Recommending at the same time that we work with the county to implement the option of a CMAR process, right? So that we can do the construction management process on some of these projects. And then finally, that we all agree that hiring an architect to explore these next phase of options is the approach that would better inform the board.
Point of clarity, are you going to present that as one item, and so we will approve everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's our recommendation. Obviously, that's the will of the board. That's just the recommendation that we're making.
Right, we could motion to separate them, et cetera, but it will be presented as one action item together in the agenda. Right, and I guess that technically kind of goes to the executive committee. So Joe, that's,
Well,
Is
after
that-
tonight, if we hear like something different than what we're showing on this paper, we could make adjustments. But we're bringing this to you tonight with the intent of bringing it to you next Thursday to vote on.
okay. So I guess I'll finish out by saying part of the reason that I was talking about lives affected and affected for the better is that prior to this, if CCA had moved to Gateway and that building had been available for Normal Park, that's and equally thinking about the future ready that would have been in the building in some aspect. I hate saying in the basement. It sounds like we were tucking them away, but in the building in some aspect, that's nearly 2,000 student lives that we could have touched. So I will continue to say that I don't know that $20 million to help 2,000 kids isn't the same as saying a $12 million overage to help up to 800 kids isn't a bad thing. But I'm not sure that the will of the board is there. So I understand that I'm one voice. I've said my voice a few times. I'm not going to stand in the way of progress to help the kids if that's the way that it's going to go. But I will absolutely support this if it includes looking at my schools, a bunch of them, and my counterpart with the same name, and other schools that need to make sure that we are we're looking at to make sure that we're doing the right thing, that we're not wasting money, that we're being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars with the right answers at hand.
And before, we've got some board members that want to speak, but before we do that, I'd like to welcome Tucker McClendon, our deputy mayor is here, and also Gino Shipley, District 1 County Commissioner. Welcome. So. I won't say that. All right, Steve Slater, if you want, please.
Yeah, I was just going to recognize Gino. It's good to have a county commissioner that cares about education, I'll just tell you. I have a couple of questions about the Gateway. What subjects are we talking? Are we talking about doing away with other future ready programs at schools? And what about the construction academy that's downtown? Are we going to do away with that?
No, sir. It's a great question. So if this gets approved, we are going to reevaluate Harrison Bay, Sequoia, and downtown, right, the Gateway building, to look at what programs, and we've already started going to middle schools, getting input from families and from kids. You could see, some program shift. I'll use an example, but like don't use this as like me saying this is going to happen, right? But we've got a vet tech program at Hickson High School that's a pretty popular program. It could be that moving that program to Sequoia that would allow Hickson students, Soddy Daisy students, Sell Creek students to access that program is a better use of those dollars. So
Yeah, we talked about that.
You could see something like that happen. To your question about what goes downtown, we don't know. What we are committed to is, and I think of this 15 million as like seed money of us putting into infrastructure. I know that there have been conversations, and we've had conversations with some downtown businesses about what pathways they might be interested in. We've got a partnership right now with Blue Cross and the Blue Sky Institute for some graduate students that go there and get a 4-year degree in 27 months. I could very easily see a computer science pathway at Gateway that would serve not only Blue Cross well in that Blue Sky program, but other surrounding businesses. The need for competent computer techs, coders, programmers is a growing industry that's not going away. And so I could see some of that, but I don't want to pigeonhole us at Gateway to say we're for sure going to do this, because when we invest this money, the hope is that businesses will come alongside of us and help us build out the programming. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And the construction career is not going away. We would almost treat it as like a sister school to downtown that would provide more access to those schools.
Okay. While I've got the mic here, let's talk about Sidesi Middle for just a second. I'm still looking, the existing capacity that was built like in 1960 is 654. We have approximately 500 kids there now. And we're talking about doing the school, redoing the school for 605. So we're going to be building a smaller school that's already there. That just doesn't make sense to me. We've got to put this school, because of the growth that's coming up that way, we've got to build that school just a little bigger. And it's not going to be long until Sale Creek's going to have to be built onto too, because of the growth. So I just need everybody to keep that in mind.
I meant to mention this earlier. I point to the language that we clarified that this is on the middle school site, to your point a couple weeks ago of that. Yeah.
Chairman Smith?
It took me 7 years to get them buses up there moved. You remember that battle?
No, sir, I don't. You can remind me after.
Well, I just kind of say that to help us to remember. When we, of course, did the study and we adopted that 0 phase, and then we had a phase 1, and then we had a phase 2. And that phase 2 is what we're talking about here now. But as I recall, we had a gym on that phase 2 up in Hickson, and it's disappeared now. So my question is, I guess it's a question, is this list here, the exploration of facility options, is that a fluid list, or is this just exactly where you want to go?
Yeah, so people listening and new board members, referring to the phase of MGT report.
That's right.
And there was
That's right.
phase 1, and so we're not getting to all those projects in phase 1. We would be getting to a lot of them. And so what I'm talking about when I say phase 2, it's kind of phase 2 of this funding and the next set of funding. I don't think this is all encompassing. I think there are always projects that can be added, but if you remember, Justin, what was the bond issue that did the Howard Stadium? Was that 17 or? So like the 17 bond issue that everybody will point to, like East Hamilton Middle, but that bond issue ended up helping to fund Tyner Stadium, right? And so I don't want you to hear me say that the gym at Hickson, Lookout Valley people would say the gym at Lookout Valley, that's off the list. This is the kind of what I would say the next phase of funding for major projects.
Well, I'd just like to see that happen, Dr. Robertson, before I go to be with Jesus. So let's don't forget that, okay?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Black?
Sorry, you can't make me laugh like that. Since we're talking about this second page of like exploring with architects these other projects, I just want to make a formal request that auxiliary building at Clifton Hills is added to this list so that we go through that process, or if we go back to the original architects, whatever you want to do, I just want to make sure that that's included in these efforts.
I think we would include that with this design. I think
Okay.
as part of this conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I know the Gateway building downtown, I've heard from my Alton Park community that they don't feel like they have a middle school. And I know that one option for the Future Ready Institutes at Gateway is high-tech stuff. We've closed, or we're in the process of closing Howard Connect, which a lot of the work that's done there, project-based learning that's done there, is based around technology. And do you see that there might be an option to have a 6 through 12 environment at Gateway, or is it strictly going to be like one of these institutes that like kids come from other schools and they're caught there and it's only high school?
Yeah, it's strictly 9 through 12. Now to your question about middle school capacity, that's why Orchard Knob is on this approach of getting someone to come look at that building. Right now, Orchard Knob is way under capacity, and we think that if that building is able to be salvaged and we can put some money into it, our thought process is that we need to think about a redesign of that school to better feed into opportunities like a Gateway. And so we're thinking about what you're thinking about is what I would say.
And I know that, like, we've talked about this before, but the Alton Park community doesn't really feel a whole lot of ownership over Orchard Knob because those communities consider themselves to be different communities. But I just wanted to kind of like throw that out there, to make sure that we're thinking about all of those things. And I know Eastlake Academy is getting very, very, very full, and we may have to look at like the zoning lines for that school in addition to whatever we're doing at Orchard Knob, or whatever other middle school opportunities we're providing in the downtown area. So I just want to continue to keep that conversation open. Thank you.
Mr. Doherty?
Just to confirm, Justin, the architect funding that comes out of the general fund balance.
Yeah.
And this may be a silly question, but for the ones that were on this first page, these 5 projects, we already engaged with an architect
We did.
for this. So
Just
there-
to get these initial numbers and the
Yeah.
idea, like, I'll go back to Clifton Hills, and it would be similar to Thrasher, to be able to go up to Thrasher and say, if you do an addition, here's where you could do it, here's how big it could be, to do that preliminary work. We would obviously, if we engaged in building it, we would have to go back and either do the CMAR process or get an architect to design the actual building.
Okay. And then we're all kind of, people that spoke are kind of talking about a similar thing in terms of growth, and I think we're all on the same page in terms of like trying to plan for growth. I am curious how, you talked about a little bit when we were communicating today, and I know growth's hard to predict. I mean, you could go to the RPA and they're going to tell you what's in development today, but Ben, you'll agree with me, you could look at a GIS map and you can look at undeveloped land, and chances are 75% of that land in the next 10 years is probably going to be developed. Are we proactively looking at that in terms of growth, in terms of the way we are expanding? And
Ben Coulter and Robert's office looks at that a lot, and for the most part, we've gotten pretty good at it. There are some places where, you couldn't predict. Clifton Hills, Howard is a good example of like that growth. I don't think anybody 10 years ago could have predicted it. But we've gotten pretty good at it. I do think that Mr. Slater brings up a good point that, in this process at Soddy Daisy Middle, we always want to build. Justin, remind me of the capacity that we talk about. Is it like 85 to 90%? Like,
Sweet spot.
we want to we kind of want schools to be at that 85 to 90% capacity. And so when we build a school, Tyner, for example, there's capacity there that we would expect them to grow into. And, to Mr. Slater's point, we probably need to look at Soddy Daisy, and when the architect gets on board, talk about adding some capacity there.
yeah, okay. Thanks, Justin.
Ms. Jones?
I have a question about, excuse me, about page 2, the phase 2 next steps recommendations, the exploration of facility options. So I see on here where it talks about Barger moving to the former Dalewood site, but also with just any of these potential explorations, what happens if they begin to explore and it seems like something actually takes more priority than what we've already talked about? Because I feel like you're going to get into that space. I mean, I was just telling Joe and Jody, Orchard Knob Middle School used to be Orchard Knob Junior High. My mother went there. She is in her mid-70s. So I can't imagine what would happen when you begin to get into that wall, because we know what happened when we got into those Turner walls. And so I'm just like, what happens when you begin to explore and the architects come back based off of what we know from MGT? I mean, because I remember us talking about a middle school going to put a magnet component to Archer Knob Middle. There was some discussion a couple of years ago about that to expand there, utilize the campus, the area, because it's flat there. So I guess I'm just, and we talked about that, and we talked about Howard Connect ending, maybe to sending it there. I mean, there's been a couple of conversations there, but just what does that look like if you start to look into any of these, honestly? And it's like, yeah, they probably don't need to be in there.
Well, that informs the board that we can't do it, and that's the whole point of, like, you know, when we're talking about sinking millions of dollars into Orchard Knob, I think we've got a responsibility to make sure that building is salvageable for the next 15, 20, 30 years, and if it's not, then we need to start thinking, what do we do on that campus? And so the point of it is to exactly what you're saying, is we don't want to say we're going to move kids from Barger into Delwood, and then we get there and find out that there's a significant problem. We want someone to go in, look at it, give us some recommendations before we move forward. And again, like, to you and I, like, spending $15,000 on that sounds like a lot of money, but when you're talking about $189 million worth of projects,
Right.
like, that is well worth spending it so that we aren't putting, you know, good money in bad places.
Then I have another question to this piece. So I know these are listed this way. These are not in any significant order, right? Because I would love to know that Barger went into a building that wasn't raining on the kids' heads every day before Gateway got a phase 2. Just sorry, I just would.
No, they're not in any
Okay.
particular order. I do
Okay.
think what I would say is that if you were asking me my recommendation, that the Normal Park and the Signal Mountain Elementary space are the two most pressing needs in terms of us trying to figure out what we need to do there.
Okay, and then I think very close to B or 1B would be Barger, because if I get one more call or text, or I actually go in there myself and get wet in the middle of my head.
Remember, that's a domino, though, because
Right.
Bellwood kids have got to be able to move into the new
Yeah.
expansion at Brainerd, so we're at least 2.5, 3
Okay.
years.
I want to see that before I go to see Jesus too. Tucker, make it happen. Lastly, I do want to say to the current board members, when we talk about growth, Joe and I have been here a while. We talk about growth. We got here because people were chasing growth. And so I want to remind the board that while we want to address growth, and growth is happening, we don't want to chase growth, because that is why our facilities got to the capacity they're in now. And that's why we need new facilities, because people are moving into areas. But that's also why we need to fix schools that are falling apart, because a lot of the money went to where the people were moving, and we forgot about where the people are staying. And so I just want to be cautious. We have to find that balance, if balance is even a word with this. We have to find what that looks like, because you don't want to disenfranchise or marginalize any community or make an inequitable decision because you're chasing growth. Because growth, just given what I learned about rural and urban social work, people will move out and people will move back in. And that's what's happening now. People moved out and we chased it, and now they're coming back and we ain't got nowhere for them to go. So we have to just be cautious of what that looks like when we're making these decisions. We want to make sure everybody's being addressed, but just think about that, because it's a sign. I mean, now that is historical. People just move out and in. So we want to make sure that we're not forgetting communities.
Mr. Connor will speak, and then I'll summarize it, and then we'll move on to the next.
Thank you, Chair. So I would make the suggestion that the second page is something that we do them all. Like, we got to look at all these. I'm not saying we do them. I'm saying we get the exploring. So I was under the assumption that my vote would be for us to do all of these, and as they're completed, brought back to the board.
Yes, it will. What I'm saying is, like, if you're asking me about priority, like the Barger, if we waited a year to get an architect to go look at it, it's not gonna make a difference because it's at least 2.5, 3 years before
Right, but-
that's even a possibility. But
But
yes,
we can get
yeah,
rolling.
yeah.
Sorry, I was looking. I have too many papers. Okay, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't on the next thing. Okay, so you guys have given me a great segue. I'm kind of gonna beat up again on this, what everybody said about growth and expansion, but it was a great segue, so thank you for that. Because I completely agree that as soon as the sewers get up all the way into Saudi Daisy real far, we are gonna, Commissioner Shipley's gonna have a big job on his hands of getting roads for all the growth that'll be there. We'll be talking about the high school again, expanding at the high school, so we don't need to start with a school that's smaller than it is. So I completely agree with Mr. Slater. But equally, you know, the south side's exploding. North Shore, Red Bank, they're building houses on postage stamps, and they're building, also in Lupton City, you know, we've got stuff that's going in that's going to be high volume amount of people in a small amount of space. So I think that Hamilton County has seen dramatic growth in the last 10 years, and it's only going to keep going the way that it's looking. So I could not agree more that 85 or lower may be what we need to shoot for so that we have the ability to grow specifically in places that we've just noted, Saudi Daisy, Signal Mountain, basically all of District 6, South Side. So I say that to say this again, and I'm sure you knew I would say it once more. Talking about DuPont, Rivermont, Alpine Crest, I've still got my numbers in front of me, and you better be prepared this time because I've given you a whole month. So help me walk through this, because if you look at my incredible handwriting here, you'll notice that I've figured it out, and at the exact capacity we're at right now, we're short seats. If we assume that there is a full capacity of 800 students at DuPont, that leaves us and I've luckily been able to get the numbers for this calendar year, or this school year, sorry. So if we do this school year, we add 5 schools together and put them over 3 schools, with one of them being a brand new 800 seat school, we have 100 spots left, 102 to be exact.
So 102, I think your number includes pre-K, which hours, I looked at it.
Should not.
We looked at it afterwards, and I think the number's 53. That's what we're pulling up, but
53.
we did
That's
look
a-
at it after that last meeting, and by the numbers that we were talking about a year and a half ago, or a year ago, it's 53 seats that we've got to come up with.
Okay, that's still not good. 53 is, so if we're looking at this just in general, we went from 130 to 102 spots available. So we gained 30 students in 1 year, gained. You're fine. In my number, we went from, I'll do the exact math. We went from 129 to 101 spots. So we gained 27 students in just 1 school year. That just is indicative of what we were all talking about growth is here. We're ready for it. We won't be ready for it by the time this building is opened. If we grow even at 20 students a year, we will not have the seats available. We will be at capacity at all 3 of the schools we're talking about.
Yes, and I think that's where it goes into the conversation about Hickson and Big Ridge that we've had, of like eventually, because of where those buildings are and capacity and shape, there's gonna have to be some kind of discussion about what we do there.
Rezoning, but
Not just rezoning, I'm saying like additional space.
Okay, I was gonna say, I'm not gonna speak for Mr. Smith, Chair Smith, but I know that his schools are near capacity as well.
Yeah, and so there's gonna have to be discussion about additional space. We looked at this after the meeting. You're right, we're a little bit over seats, whether it's 50 or 100. There are a couple of things that we can look at, like, and this doesn't just go for there, this goes for East Brainerd Road. You and I talked about this, like, we're housing pre-K seats in a lot of our buildings that are taking up capacity. We've had some conversations with partners about how do we better utilize their space, our space, to expand pre-K spots in specific locations. You and I even spoke about, like, does Rivermont maybe help with some of that? And so there are some things that over the next year and a half, 2 years, that we need to work on to deal with that. I think we've got strategy to do it, but eventually the growth that we're gonna have to look at is moving up towards Hickson and Big Ridge to figure that out.
So I hear you, and I worry a lot about the amount of people in all of the areas. In my looking at it, opinion, if you want to call it that, yeah, I think that Rivermont may be a elementary school again. in
Oh, down
next
the
10
road,
years.
yeah, I don't.
Because
disagree
of the growth specifically around that, with
Yeah.
the property, with the Lupton Old Mill property specifically, with the GPS fields that were sold next to it, with a multitude of other things playing into that.
And again, I think that's why we hold on, like, you know, it's why we
Correct.
held on to the old CSLA property, because eventually I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, it's maybe 10, 15 years down the road, but something has to go there. Rivermont, I think, is the exact same thing. It's a really important piece of property for future discussions.
And let me pause to say, we do have to be very careful about how centralized we have a pre-K center. I think that it's a great idea, but there need to be in areas, not
Yeah, yeah.
just one that everyone's bused
Yeah.
to, because busing pre-K kids, trust me, I do it a lot. It's an interesting situation. Yeah, my Suburban. So, okay, saying that to say again that, and I'm going to steal words from Madam Vice Chair, we're chasing growth. And I want to make sure that I say it enough times that I can say I told you so. Like, we're chasing growth, and we told the community that we would not max out this school at 800 the day one, but it's looking like that. And so that's where I'm worried. And I want to make sure that that I keep asking and we keep seeing a better plan than just building this school that people, the number one thing was we don't want a huge school. We don't want a huge school. So I don't want to open it at capacity. I want to have that 85% and hopefully stay near there. So we need to figure that out.
We do. As a board and administration, though, we also have to recognize that decisions that we've made over the last 30 years to operate small, very small, and really small schools has created a lot of this problem. The recommendation of Alpine Crest, DuPont, and Rivermont was not for me. Goes all the way back to 1999, and people don't want to hear this in this community, but until we're willing to fund schools better, we have got to find operational efficiencies. And in these situations, you know, by the time this is all said and done, when you include Tyner in these projects, we're reducing our footprint by 5 schools. Nobody likes to hear that, but this board and this administration, we're responsible for, people give us a hard time all the time about using tax dollars effectively and efficiently and being good stewards of tax dollars. We have to make hard decisions like this. And I know people all the time say that we don't want huge schools, but we have Clifton Hill sitting here begging to keep a huge school. And that's huge is not my word. That's
It's not,
someone
it's not a
else's.
huge school. I think when they
700 kids.
Yeah.
I think when we talk about like the community doesn't want 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 elementary schools, seat elementary schools. That's what that's what I think of. I appreciate when during this discussion us capping it at 800, because that seems to be kind of a sweet spot number where it still feels like a smaller environment where, you know, kids know it and adults know each other, but also we're able to put more things there, you know, because we have them together.
So I will continue to say
Wrap it
that
up, please.
I wasn't, well, I gotta get a couple more points through first, and it's some part of this is important. Even the board members the new board members that were not on this board know that I tried to find a few places to put a large school, because I recognize that a large school, meaning 500 to 600 kids, means that those children have a full-time PE teacher, a full-time art teacher. They have a guidance counselor. They don't have to worry about having a meltdown on Tuesday because she's not there that day or he's not there that day. Like, I get it, and I fought for different options. I'm not fighting against the site at this point. I tried. I'm just making sure that we are not chasing growth, that we are actively thinking towards a growing school system and getting there. Again, anyway. I think that's everything.
So I'm going to kind of wrap it up, and then we'll talk about next steps and hopefully ready to go. But so first of all, as we look at this and we add these up, it's 158 million for these 5 projects, with best estimate and leaning toward the high end of the estimate, and that's 158 out of the possible 200. That doesn't mean we need to use all 200, but what it does show is that we've still got a little bit of room for possible growth. So we might later on be able to revisit that. Second thing, there are spaces. Something that we've got to look at is, as we close a few structures, we've got to start thinking about where's the money going to come for the next bond, and we have a few different possibilities there to help, seed money for the next bond. But I will say this, MGT challenged us years ago. What is it now, 7 years?
About 4 or 5.
Oh, I was still principal at the adult high school when they did it, though. So-
2020.
Okay. All right. They challenged us to lower the square footage of the facilities that we run to better serve our community. But it also challenged us to improve the structures that we have, that we were going to continue to go on, and that's what we've been looking at. I think we have a historical opportunity here with our county commission, our mayor, and our school board to begin the largest growth of new educational structures that we've had since the 1970s. If you remember, in the early 70s, or you might not know, the federal government provided federal money, and for everybody that built a school, the federal government paid for half of it, and then the state and local paid for half of it. And that's how Hickson Middle, Hickson High, Ooltewah Middle, Ooltewah High, Central, Brown, just to name 6 of them, that's how they came about, because the federal government gave us half the money for that. We're coming up with this money ourselves, along with our commission, and we're going to look at doing what we can possibly do that's best for all. And we've got the opportunity, I guess, so the next step that we need to think about is what's it going to take to get these 5 going, and then to also start, as soon as we get those moving, then start looking at what's the next important steps that we have. And everybody has things they want to put in there. We have the large plan that, had a phase 2 with it. That's actually been changed a lot, but we'll look back at some of those. But I think, what we've got here is a very doable budget of funding for 5 good things. I know nobody's going to be completely happy with all of them, but as a whole, we've got a lot of great opportunities here that we can meet our students and our families with. So, discussion of next steps. Do you want to take a moment for that, Dr. Robertson?
I mean, the next steps is that we bring this to you next Thursday for a vote, which then we would move forward with, the process of working through these 5 projects, working with county to make allowable the CMAR process, and so we would be moving forward.
And that is 6 o'clock. Again, Dr. Sharp will get a hold of you if he hasn't already with regards to the capital projects money. And we'll take a short 5-minute break, and then Ms. Schaefer
Gary,
will...
I'm sorry, Mr. King, can give a quick update about custodial.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, we discussed with you, I think it was at our last facilities meeting, about some options we were exploring. We have made some progress on that work, determined at the end of last week, yesterday, first of this week, that I think it would be best for us to proceed with the RFP process, and we're putting that together. We've got a rough draft together that we're doing some final touches with. We are consulting with Core America, which is the custodial consulting group that's helping us revise our RFP, looking at the bid process, and we'll be bringing more information to you as that progresses. But our plan now is to release that bid 1st of December if things continue to progress at this point. And so I just want to let you know that's where we are.
Are you moving with getting somebody to manage that contract, or there was some?
No,
conversation?
what we're doing right now is we're going into the RFP process. We will have support from Core America throughout that process. They will help us look at the different bids that come in. They'll have some resources that we can compare those to some national standards, how that applies here locally. And our plan will be to, depending on the number of bids that we receive, we're hoping that we'll get a number to look at to bring you at least a couple of companies to present to the board that might be in a facilities committee meeting, Gary, or but we will have Core America shepherding that process up until the point where we bring you a recommendation.
So you just didn't feel like it was a good idea at all to
What changed from last meeting to this meeting is we went back after that meeting, talked to SSC about extending the contract. It had to be on mutual agreeable terms because it was extending for a year. The best option that, when I spoke to the Vice President, was a 5% increase and a 2-year extension, which was not in the contract. And so for us to do what their best option was, we would have had to take it to bid anyway. And so we did as much as we could, working alongside them to come up with a mutually agreeable contract, and we just could not get there. And so moving forward, Dr. Sharp said taking to RFP is what we need to do, and we'll work through that process. I believe there's going to be competitive bids. I mean, you guys were at TSBA. I'm sure if you walked into that exhibit room, you might have been talked to by a few people. And so I'm confident that we're going to have some competitive bids and get this to a place where we need to.
Go ahead, Ms. Jones.
Have we considered, I mean, now, because I was about to ask the same question he asked, but now that we're going to put it out to RFP, are we considering looking at, or what is it, Core America? That just sounds like a penitentiary, but anyway. It's a side note that gives me vibes. But anyway, Core America, have they, or could we talk to them about what it may look like to do a couple of companies? And I know this sounds crazy, but what I'm saying is, like, locally, there are several, like, local cleaning companies that may be willing to say, they may just want to serve the Midtown schools, or they may just want to serve Rock Point, or they, I mean, they may have the capacity to serve just maybe 10 schools and not 78 or 87.
If you remember when we put the last RFP out, we actually put that in the RFP.
Right, and so I was
let
wondering,
people
will we
respond to it. What we found is that the price increased to, I don't remember the exact percentage, but it was more because you've got a company that's coming in and their profit is going to be based on the number of, like, the square footage. And if you reduce the square footage by half, well, then they've got to have a higher number to make profit. And so it would have cost us more money to break it up.
But will we, I mean, the only reason I'm asking that is because I've had several companies locally, like small companies that are District 5 constituents, reach out to me about the possibility of doing that. And so I don't want
You can
to
have them,
dismiss
what
could
reach
be a
out and
potential.
look at it. But if you recall, and maybe there's been some locals that have grown, but even the local vendor that we have now as
Right.
part of SSC didn't have the capacity then. to do it. And so we can talk to them about putting that option. Right now, for us to get the best price, it's going to be with someone that
The major
can do
bid.
the entirety of the.
What we are doing, which is different from the last time we did the RFP, is we're advertising the custodial and the grounds separately. So there will be lawn companies that will bid separately for that piece of the work.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay. Well, hey, that was an easy win, wasn't it?
Don't think you won just yet.
I'll say this is not where we wanted to be as administration. We were hopeful that we could get a one-year extension. But we also recognize that within the current contract, it said 2% and a 1 year. They came back with 5% and a 2 year, which we can't do within the current contract. Obviously, we want a long-term partner. We think there are companies out there that are going to be interested in this, and so we'll go through this as smoothly as we can.
Yes, question, but you anticipate they'll come in at 5% of where we're at?
Oh, no. Honestly, we don't know. It will be more than that, would be my assumption. Hopefully it's not much more than that, but we just don't know at this point.
But, I mean, I'll put it out there. Are we committed to stick 2 years with SSC or to go and see what is out there? I mean, I talked to.
Do you think they'll bid?
I think they will.
Yeah, they will.
And I think that I know of 2 companies off the top of my head right now that are committed to bidding on it. And, I mean, we'll see what the price is, but, I think that it'll be competitive. And if you remember last time, we didn't take the low bid. We took a higher bid looking for better service. I'm not satisfied with where we've been the last 4 years. And so, we'll put some things in this new contract that hopefully will help us better manage this. But ultimately, the price is going to be a big deal. Sorry, Mr. Arya.
No, you're fine. I was just saying, I mean, I'm sure they're going to participate, right? So they're going to have an opportunity to retain the business. I mean, that's, yeah.
Okay. Anything else before we adjourn? 5-minute break, Ms. Schaefer? All right, we're adjourned.